Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Today we welcome back Dr. William Brit Kirwan, Chancellor Emeritus of the University System of Maryland. Brit is a nationally recognized authority on critical issues facing higher education. He served as Chancellor of the University System of Maryland for 13 years, President of Ohio State University for 4 years, and President of the University of Maryland College Park, their flagship, for 10 years. Prior to his presidency, he was the University of Maryland mathematics professor for 24 years. Dr. Kirwan's past chair, among other boards, the American Council of Education, Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, the American Association of Colleges and Universities, the Business Higher Education Forum, and the National Research Council Board on Higher Education and Workforce. In other words, Brit knows higher education, especially from the perspective of having sat in a big chair. Today we're going to try out a new format that we're going to use from time to time, welcoming experts and revered presidents such as Brit to the program and picking their brains. Brit joins us today to talk about the state of higher education, what he's learned over the years, and what we as higher ed need to do to turn the ship around. Brit, welcome back to the program.
Drumm, it's always great to be with you.
Likewise, my friend. I'm looking forward to this. We've been doing a lot of work together, had some really good engagements with some clients, and we've got to understand each other's philosophies a lot better, I think. And it's amazing. For a young guy like you, you really are on top of things.
Well, flattery will get you everywhere.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. You'll bring in the next engagement. No, just kidding. For those folks who don't know you, give us a little bit of background, if you would. I think that'd be helpful so people get to understand who the guy named Brit Kirwan is that I know and I really like.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Yes, I'm a mathematician. I had the great good fortune to graduate from college, the University of Kentucky, in 1960, just at the height of the great consternation in our country over Russia getting ahead of us, the Soviet Union getting ahead of us, because they had launched a spacecraft and we weren't ready to do that. And there was a sense that we'd lost our way in terms of STEM and math education. And so the government created the National Defense Education Act, which provided very generous fellowships for individuals who could win one of these awards and go off to graduate school, get a PhD in a STEM field, including mathematics. And I got one of those and went to Rutgers University and got my PhD in mathematics and went to the University of Maryland in 1964, planning on a career as an academic, teaching and doing research, which I love doing. But it came time for me to be chair of the math department, which I did for a few years. And all of a sudden, I'm getting nominated to be the institution's provost and became the provost of the campus. I remember a colleague telling me when I went off to be the provost at College Park that I would never come back to the department. I said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Of course I will. I'll be provost for a few years. I'll come back because doing research and teaching, that's my passion. That's what I want to do." But of course, he proved to be right because I then became president at College Park and served that institution for 10 years, feeling that maybe it was time for me to turn the reins over. I think 10 years is about the right time, 10, 12, whatever, for somebody to be president of an institution. So Ohio State came calling, and I went there and had a wonderful experience. But lo and behold,
including a national championship.
Yes, in football. And lo and behold, Maryland came calling me back, saying they wanted me to come back and be chancellor of the University of Maryland system. So in 2002, I did decide to return to Maryland, and I had a wonderful 13-year career as chancellor of the University of Maryland system. It's a 12 campus system with, of course, College Park being its flagship. And since that time, I stepped down in 2015, but I've been very active in a lot of different things. I've chaired a very important commission for the state at the request of the governor and the General Assembly. I'm quite involved in an organization that's trying to change the way, how, and what math is taught at the collegiate level. I'm on the university's hospital board. I've been chair of a campaign for College Park. And then I find time to work with you on a number of engagements. So it's been a very active, but very, very enjoyable life. And I think I'd offer some comments to presidents who are nearing their end of their tenure about how important it is to find things that are meaningful to you to get engaged in once you step down as president. I think it requires a significant amount of thought. I think oftentimes presidents will retire and then worry later what they're going to do. But it's just, I think, staying active, staying engaged, staying involved is not only healthy, but it leads to such a sense of reward where you can draw upon your years of experience and try to be helpful in circumstances that call upon you to get involved.
Well, it's giving back to the community that has given you so much.
Yeah, so it absolutely has. Some people often ask, what job did you like best? And the answer is the one I was doing at that moment. And I'd have to say that the years since I stepped down as chancellor have been among the best years of my life, because I feel like I am making a contribution. And there is a freedom to pick and choose what it is I'm going to do. And when you're a president or a chancellor, you do an awful lot of things you wonder if they're really productive and if it's worth spending your time on, but it's just the nature of the job. But the joy of being able to really pick and choose and then focus on where you think you can be most helpful, there's a lot to commend that.
Yeah. Well, I have a story for you. I'm sure the name Hayes. What was his first name? Football coach at
Woody Hayes.
Woody Hayes.
Oh, he's part of my part of my history.
Well, if you recall, there was a certain game back in, I think it was New Year's Eve.
Oh, yeah. That's the worst day of Woody's life.
Yes.
I was there. Lived that down.
I was there for that game. I actually saw it. Huh? I was there. I was a new ensign in the Navy. I'd graduated from the Naval Academy. I was stashed at VP 30, which was Patrol Squadron 30 there in Jacksonville. And a bunch of us went to the game. And when it happened, we looked at each other. It's like, did that really just happen?
Right. Well, I saw it on television and I couldn't believe it happened. And it's really a shame because that's how people remember Woody.
Yes.
But he had so many wonderful values and just so admired by the players that played for them. When I was president of Ohio State, I'd get and meet a bunch of these players, and there was a reverence for him, the respect they had for them and what they learned from him and how much he added to who they are as a person now. And it's interesting in these ridiculous financial packages that coaches have in this day. Here he is, an iconic, despite that bad incident, an iconic figure in coaching. And he was a professor of military history at Ohio State, and he earned a professor's salary. He didn't have all these big buyout contracts and cars and things like that. He earned what other professors at the university earned. And so, unfortunately, we've moved a long way from having that kind of perspective on what kind of resources should be invested in our intercollegiate sports at these big Power 5 schools.
And we'll talk about that in a little while, about Power 5 and where it's gone and what's happened, et cetera. In many respects, it comes right back to some of the challenges we're seeing in higher ed, which is really the focus of today's conversation.
Yeah.
lot of financial challenges that are going on. I just got off a webinar with an organization that you and I both are part of, the Association of Governing Boards. And they're talking about how institutions, there's more capacity out there than there is students to fill. It's going to get worse with the enrollment cliff.
Yeah.
We're having difficulties.
Well, and that's only one of them. The challenges are myriad when you look at higher education today. And I've said this on a number of occasions. I stepped down as chancellor in 2015, and the nature and the challenges facing college presidents and chancellors today, it's a sea change. It was a difficult job back in 2015. It is just a monumentally more difficult job today. And it's not one thing. There are the fiscal challenges, and they're huge, and there's the enrollment challenges, but the political incursions into our institutions has been a sea change in just the last 5 or 6 years. Politics getting involved in ways that just couldn't have even been imagined a decade or so ago.
Yeah.
And the issues on our campuses and the tensions on our campuses, protests and demonstrations and so on and so forth. It's almost endless what institutions and presidents are having to deal with today that just make these jobs unbelievably difficult. And not surprisingly, the tenure of college presidents and chancellors continues to decline, and it's understandable.
Yeah. Well, it makes me wonder why anybody would want to do this job.
Well, I saw a poll not so long ago that was a poll of provosts about whether they would consider becoming a university president. Now, it used to be that if you were a provost, the natural thing was after a few years, you would get into a search and probably become a president somewhere. But it was a surprising number, maybe over 50% of the provosts saying that they had no interest in becoming a university president. And they're watching what those presidents have to go through. And it's not surprising.
Well, it really isn't. Besides the fiscal challenges and the politicalization, one of the folks that you and I have spoken with and worked with, Kevin Gustowitz, there at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's considering Michigan State University, the presidency there. They've had their challenges, but the rumor mill has it, and I don't know if this is true or not, but the legislature in North Carolina wants him out for some reason. I don't know if he's not conservative enough or whatever it was, but this is that incursion of politics into higher education instead of people focusing, what's the best thing for our students?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. See it. That's a perfect example that you mentioned in North Carolina. At least it's been reported that he's already announced that he's stepping down as chancellor at UNC. Whether he's going to Michigan State or not is yet to be determined. I know he's the sole finalist for the position. It's not clear whether he's sitting on an offer or hasn't been made an offer. I just don't know. But it's clear that he'd run the course because of the politics in North Carolina. But we've seen it play out in Florida in very dramatic ways. President of the University of Florida got into a huge controversy over whether or not law faculty could testify before the General Assembly. And the president got got caught in a crossfire, I should say, between the governor and the faculty, and he's gone. And then we see what happened at New College in Florida, where the governor got rid of the board and
he blew up the board. He blew it up.
Yeah. And the new president at Florida was, of course, a prominent congressman, senator, maybe.
Senator, Ben Sasse.
Right. And of course, that upset the faculty.
At least he has his PhD, though.
Yes, he does. Yeah. We see it playing out in Texas, of course, but I still have strong connections in Ohio. And I was back there for an event and learned that there is a bill in the legislature there, which is passed, I believe, one body in the state house, but is being considered on the other. And it would basically strip out any institution's ability to engage in activities related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those words, as I understand it, couldn't even be used. And it's got people on the campus at Ohio State quite upset, justifiably so.
Sure.
But it's just yet one more example of the politicians and political forces really trying to reshape our higher education institutions. And I think for the most part, one of the reasons we have had such a historically strong system of higher education is that we have had this independence. There has been a respect for the academic freedom and the right of universities to operate under principles that insulate it from local politics. It hasn't been perfect over the years, but it's worked pretty well. But that seems to be eroding in many, many states. And I think it's a huge threat to our system of higher education, which has been the bedrock of our great economy in America. We have been the thought leader in science and technology. We've had the best educated workforce. And all of this, we've done this phenomenal research coming out of our universities. And it's really been the bedrock of building the strength, the economic strength of our country. And I've just never in my life, there had been a time when I was so worried about the future, in large part because the harm that's being done to higher education in so many states in the country. Yeah, I saw a poll. Did you see that there was a Gallup poll that was done recently about the Americans' confidence in higher education?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and it's really quite shocking. They compared 2015 with 2023, and back in 2015, almost 60% of the people polled said they had either a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in higher education. In 2023, that's down to 36%.
Mm-hmm.
Almost cut in half.
Yeah.
In a period of just 8 years. We started the conversation earlier about the financial crisis that we're feeling, the lack of confidence in the public about higher education because of all these issues that are at work, as I think in some way contributing to the financial crisis, because in many states, there's been a very sharp decline in support of higher education, and that's contributing to this fiscal crisis. Now, of course, as you pointed out, that we were coming to an enrollment decline, and that also contributes to the fiscal issues. But it's just a very troubling time for us, and the threat to higher education and the harm that can happen to our country if we don't maintain this world-renowned system of higher education is deeply, deeply troubling.
It certainly is. I wonder myself, you've got Florida, who the governor there told his attorney general to sue the Department of Education about a law that he wanted passed and had passed in Florida about changing accreditors. This was, I believe, directly related to Sachs and our friend Bell Whelan down there, who holds institutions to a very high standard.
Right.
We were talking before we came on the air today, we were talking about another institution that's on warning right now from Sachs. So he sues the federal government about the law. There goes more than that, though, trying to dictate what is taught in colleges.
Right.
There's a question that I have is, how can governments go against the First Amendment where you shall not legislate any law that prohibits freedom of speech? Isn't that what's happening?
That is one of the great ironies for me, is that a lot of these forces complain about the absence of free speech on our college campuses, and that the more conservative student groups aren't allowed to have speakers and so on and so forth. The speakers get shouted down. And on the one hand, then on the other hand, they try to pass restrictions and regulations on what professors can teach in the classroom. And basically, as I understand it, the principle established in Florida, and I think this it started in Florida, but it's creeping across our country, is that you can't teach things that will make students feel uncomfortable.
Oh my.
And I think that's the standard that's being set in K through 12 in Florida, but it's seeping into higher education as well. So that means that you can't really talk about the horrors of slavery in the U.S. or the terrible travesties that occurred after the Civil War when Reconstruction ended.
Or diversity, equity, inclusion in today's society.
So this intrusion of politics into higher education is, of all the problems we're facing, it's among the most, if not the most troubling, because it really threatens the foundation of our higher education institution. And it is reflective of what's going on in the larger society, of course.
Mm-hmm.
The great division in our country right now is something I don't think it's at a level that you and I have never witnessed in our lifetime.
No, it to me, it goes back to the Civil War, that kind of divisiveness.
Right. But the fact that this is now coming into our education system at all levels, and in particular to our universities, it's an existential threat to the quality of our higher education, our education system, but in particular our higher education.
Yeah. I have an interesting perspective on that. I remember going through Navy, Naval Academy,
right,
things like that. And we were always told that one of the major differentiation points between ourselves and the Soviets is they had a game plan that they would always follow, and they didn't have the critical thinking and the innovation to be able to deviate from that. Whereas the U.S. forces, they pushed the command right down to the battlefield commander. It was up to him or her to be, and back then it was just him, to make the decisions there. And one of the reasons that the Soviets didn't want to come up against us was because we were so unpredictable. Now, if we follow the playbook that we're seeing at colleges, you can't teach this. You can't learn to think for yourself. You have to think in this particular way. It makes me a bit concerned that we're losing that ability to innovate. We're losing that ability to think independently, to come to our own decisions.
Right. Well, it's more than a little bit.
Well, you know me, I tend to be a little bit of an understater.
But it actually is reminiscent, sadly, of what went on in Nazi Germany, where textbooks got rewritten.
Burned.
And similarly, I think in the Soviet Union, that revisionist history.
Of course, we have none of that going on right now, do we?
Right. But I think when you look at our traditions, we had some ugly things in our history, but for the most part, we've been able to expose them and talk about them and try to address them. But what we see in a lot of places in our country right now, an attempt to whitewash the past and create a new revisionist history in the United States. There was this ridiculous comment, I forget, by some political figure talking about the benefits of slavery to slaves, that they learn skills that would be important life skills.
Yeah, I read that one too. I was horrified.
Right. Anyway, it's troubling. And I think the difficult thing is what to do about this. how do we reverse this trend? What is it going to take for us to get back on track, as it were, and restore higher education to being able to operate as a source of truth and investigation and debate and inquiry? And I just worry that in too many places in our country right now, we're losing that capacity. And it is true, and to be fair, it isn't everywhere in our country. Here I am in Maryland, I don't see any threat to our higher education institutions by political intrusion. I think that's the case pretty much across the Northeast and parts of the West, et cetera. But in too many places, there is this intrusion of politics that, as I say, an existential threat to our higher education system, and therefore, I think, to the great country we are privileged to live in.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When I think about what we can do, I think it's really something people need to stand in the truth. And it's not just one side. We, as parents, or in our case, grandparents or great-grandparents,
right,
maybe, what are we teaching our kids about tolerance? What are we teaching our kids about listening to opposing views? Mm-hmm. When you get students who don't like what a speaker is saying, who turn their back to them, yeah, they can do that, do it silently. Right. But when you scream the speaker down just because you don't like what he or she is saying, that's not only rude, it's showing a lack of willingness to listen to others' perspectives.
Yeah.
And that's to me, that's what academic freedom is listening and keeping open to finding where the research takes you.
Yeah. And on this score, I think this is a pretty universal problem across all of higher education. This isn't restricted to certain states. We saw the horrible incidents at MIT recently, where, the conflict between the Palestinian supporters and Israeli supporters, and the administration tried to step in and do something, and now everybody's mad at the administration because they blew it. And something similar happened at Penn, and even Harvard. And so this management of divisiveness and conflict on our college campuses is a pretty universal issue for college presidents, and not all of them are handling it as well as we'd like to see.
Yeah, it definitely is. Well, Brit, this has been a wonderful conversation. We've not solved the problems of the world, but we certainly talked a bit about them. And
we ought to come back and talk a little bit, and not just wring our hands, but talk about what might be done to address these problems.
Let's do that after the first of the year.
Okay.
I really enjoyed our conversation. We won't do 3 takeaways and that other stuff. To me, this was just a fireside chat with someone who's been around the block at least once or twice, and how things change. So thank you for doing this.
Sure, Drumm. Always a pleasure to be with you, and look forward to our next conversation.
Likewise, my friend. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks for listening, and a special thank you to our guest, Dr. William Brit Kirwan, for his sharing his perspectives on the state of higher education. Brit, thank you. You are truly one of the great university presidents of our time, and your perspectives are timeless. Join us next week when we welcome Dr. Carrie Lovelace Petter, a former senior student affairs officer and faculty member, and now consultant to higher ed institutions in the area of leadership development coaching. Carrie will be joining us to talk about what presidents need to do to create a healthy, high-performing work culture in today's multi-generational workplace. Thanks for listening. See you next week.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode, at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show. We would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.